This morning, I'd like to talk about a few of the key things in the way that I've been teaching with this group that are foundational or core kind of approaches to following the Buddhist path, that I wanted to be sure I've been clear enough about with you all, as this is a perspective that I bring. It's what I'm teaching. I don't think you'll hear anything that's a surprise, but just for the sake of clarity, I'm going to go over it. The starting place is starting with the understanding that all of the teachings of the Buddha, as we find them in the early discourses, are best understood as being food for practice, as being about some things for us, teaching us things to do in order to develop the Buddhist path. Things to be developed, things to be worked with, lived with, again and again, day after day, over time. Not something to believe, not some ideal to try to become, but things to do. And when we read the early discourses, I believe it's most beneficial, most helpful to read them in this way. How do I practice this teaching that I'm reading about now? It's a guiding question. It's a core guiding question. So they're starting with that understanding. And coming back to that understanding again and again. One of the other key ways that it's become meaningful to me to practice with the Buddhist path that's different than what I hear from other places in some ways is an understanding around working with the four Brahmaviharas, the Four Divine Abidings. And from my point of view, it's really important, it matters a lot that when these four are taught, they're always taught in the same order. First, we're guided to practice cultivating a mind and a heart of metta or goodwill. And the quality in the metta and the goodwill is to be expansive in all directions. Love, benevolence to all beings as to ourselves. So there are teachings in the discourses that guide us in how to develop that quality of mind and heart that's metta. And then second of the four divine abiding is compassion, karuna. And in our meditation this morning, we practiced in that way. We practiced after establishing mindfulness in the body, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then we shifted to focus on extending goodwill to this body, to this being, in the context of being aware of our own personal suffering, first of all. And I invited you to think of some particular circumstance that was one of suffering for you. And then to bring that quality of metta, of goodwill, for ourselves, first of all, in our suffering. May we be safe. May we be well. May we be happy. And then to extend that at some point, maybe after a long time, maybe after weeks and months of practice or years, to bring love to ourselves in circumstances of suffering. Then shifting back to that pervasive, all-encompassing, extending in all directions. May all beings who suffer be safe, well, and happy. That practice of compassion. The third of the four divine abidings is rejoicing. The Pali word is mudita. And mudita is the complement to karuna. Is compassion arises when goodwill and love meet suffering. So rejoicing arises when a heart and mind that have cultivated metta, love, meets an occasion for happiness, a circumstance for rejoicing. So, and that could be a lot of things. I mean, there are a lot of times in life when there are, for ourselves or for others, there's reason for happiness. But the kind of the ultimate example, I think, is the happiness that comes with following the Buddhist path and developing more freedom from suffering. And this shows up in practically every discourse, in the middle length discourses, where the close of the discourse, it's always some phrase, almost always, and it's always noticeable when it's not a phrase where the Buddha has given the teachings and to the monks in particular, to the monastics, they hear the teachings and they rejoice in them. This is mudita. And then the fourth of the Brahmaviharas is equanimity or upekkha. For me, it's become very helpful and continues to be at this point very helpful to understand equanimity as a Brahmavihara is being the quality of heart and mind that accompany when there's a basis in when the heart and mind are founded in love and goodwill, and the quality of wisdom is added in, then that's equanimity. So when a deep understanding of the Four Noble Truths, what they mean, what the implications are, what the meaning is of the Four Noble Truths, comes along with metta, then that quality of equanimity is what emerges, is what we develop. One of the common teachings around equanimity is a teaching for cultivating equanimity that invites us to reflect on the phrase, all beings are the heirs of their actions, the owners of their actions, and not of my wishes for them. So these are ways to think about and work with practicing the four Brahmaviharas. The other piece here for me has become very important to really believe that word vihara, vihara meaning dwelling or abiding, that these practices are a place not just to visit from time to time, but a place to live all the time. So I wanted to be clear that that's a teaching that I bring from my span on the early discourses at this point. So I offer it, like all teachings, in the hope that it'll be useful in understanding that everybody needs to work with them in our own ways. For me, there's also a way that I would like to be clear that I've come to understand the practice of cultivating mindfulness. That is different, not in every way, but in ways that are meaningful to me, different than what I've encountered from anybody else so far. There are bits and pieces, of course, many things that are the same, and some things that I draw on from other teachers, but the whole package is a little bit different. So I wanted to try and give an overview of that. I know that you all have heard it all before, but maybe you haven't heard it all together. So this is what I have to offer, and I want to be clear about it. First of all, contemporary popular use of the word mindfulness, which has really taken off in the culture as a whole, which really just uses mindfulness as a synonym for awareness. So you could be mindfully delighting in the juicy sweetness of an orange. That's not what the Buddha is talking about with mindfulness. That's a sense pleasure, and really we're not really encouraged to try to make those any bigger than they naturally are for us as humans. So that's not what the Buddha means. He doesn't mean mindfully becoming a gunner in an airplane or helicopter somewhere, more able to shoot down your targets because you're so mindful about how you're doing it. Not what it means. This is really important, I think. So just a few key pieces about what is helpful to me to read in the discourses that the Buddha is clearly saying it does mean. This may not be everything, but these are clearly teachings that are there. I absolutely assert that. So to start with, there are qualities that when the Buddha is teaching mindfulness, always accompany the quality of mindfulness. And those kind of qualities are things like diligence, ardency. There's an energy to mindfulness. And sampajanya, which means it's translated in different ways, but awareness, clear awareness, circumstantial awareness. And so sati, which is mindfulness, and sampajanya are often in the discourses used as if they were one hyphenated word. They go together so closely. And one of the examples of what the Buddha is talking about with clear awareness is the example of a person could be practicing walking meditation and walking along the meditation path, just very tuned in to the sense experience of the foot touching the path, the weight shifting in the lower leg, and keeping that focus there, which is going to be great for developing the unification of mind that comes with concentration. And, just walk right off the edge of the porch or something, or just depending on walking up down a step without being aware that that was the situation. That was the circumstance. So they have to come together. And for me, this is most important when we're practicing meditation, because say if we're keeping our focus on the breath, it's not only to stay with the breath, it's also to be aware of the whole circumstance around the meditation practice, and particularly to a deeper and deeper understanding of how mindfulness of breath in the body develops into mindfulness of breath and feelings, develops into mindfulness of breath in the mind, and then ultimately develops into complete freedom from the hindrances and developing the awakening factors, which leads to liberation of the mind, cessation of suffering. So it's clear comprehension that lets us see, oh, if I use this counting technique at the beginning, don't hold on to it too tightly, then I'm more able to stay with the breath, that sensation of breath there at the tip of the nose. And when I do that, the mind starts to calm down and I'm not thinking so much anymore. And then there's a pleasantness to that. There's a feeling tone. And then when I shift to that feeling tone, my mind gets more and more quiet and still, focused and letting go, just with the breath. And then the mind, the quality of the mind shifts. And when I do that, then that's moving in the direction of freedom from suffering. So these are examples of how bringing together that kind of present awareness with the context of what we're doing, the circumstances, and understanding how they work together. This is key in developing mindfulness. And then the other angle that I did want to take some time with, because I am seeing it differently than I've heard others talk about it, is what the Buddha teaches we are to do in order to establish mindfulness. So once we've brought all those qualities that apply across the board, including the quality of remembering the teaching, then we are to practice, in my view, we are to practice with the exercises that the Buddha teaches for establishing mindfulness. And these are very practical, nitty-gritty, concrete exercises. And I decided some years back to do an experiment of practicing with establishing mindfulness, just using the exercises that scholars like Bhante Sujato, Bhikkhu Analayo, and others who they base their work on, tell us that these are the exercises that show up across all of the early traditions. Right? So it sounds like pretty good evidence that the Buddha wanted us to do this in order to develop the path. And the exercises are really concrete. There are 3 around mindfulness of the body. There's being aware. There's reviewing the parts of the body very concretely. The head hair, the body hair, the nails, the teeth, the skin. And there's a litany of 31, 32, depending where you look, at these parts. There's that practice. In this body, there is this. There's the practice of understanding the body as being composed of the elements, and that the internal elements and the external elements, the earth, the water, the fire, the wind, they're the same. There's no difference. And there's practice to guide us through that contemplation step by step. We can work with it. We can do that practice. And then finally, the third practice for establishing mindfulness of body is a reflection on a body decomposing on a charnel ground. And it guides us through 9 different stages that a body goes through after it's died of decomposition. And very clear visual imagery is evoked. And we're encouraged to understand that this body that we're imagining in our minds and our own body are the same. So we understand the impermanence. Not as a theoretical concept, just as the way things are. These 3 practices, when we practice them, we are establishing mindfulness of the body. And once we have got that mindfulness of the body in that particular concrete way, well established, it's like we become attuned all the time through that understanding, through that establishment of mind. There are 4 establishments of mindfulness. It's not an accident that mindfulness of the body comes first. And in my view, from what I've understood from reading and practicing so far, once there's a strong foundation in that kind of mindfulness of the body, it shapes our ability to clearly see our experience around feelings, to be able to see more clearly what feelings are pleasant, what are painful, what are neutral, to be able to see more clearly, most importantly, which of these pleasant, painful, and neutral feelings are we experiencing around having some sort of sense experience that's a worldly sense experience, which we know is going to be impermanent, right? Because that's how we roll in that sense realm. And which of those pleasant, painful, and neither feelings come from something else that's not about sense pleasure. And this is particularly useful when we're practicing meditation, because staying with the breath physically becomes a very pleasant feeling as our concentration develops. And then, having established that mindfulness of the body based in the first 3 exercises, and then moving into getting more and more clarity around the feeling tone of experience and the cause and effect around looking for our pleasant feelings from sense experience as compared with what happens when we have these very pleasant feelings that come from letting go, from letting go of that sort of craving and aversion that comes with wanting our happiness from sense pleasure. And then, once we have established more mindfulness around feelings, there's less cluttering up the mind. We're doing less grasping and pushing away. The mind is easier to see more clearly. And this is establishing the mindfulness of the mind. We can see more clearly, when is the mind leaning towards grasping? When is it leaning toward aversion? When is the mind getting lost in some delusion about how what's impermanent could be permanent, or what's me and mine and myself and is impermanent is going to lead to suffering? So that's our establishing our mindfulness in the mind. When is the mind craving? When is it grasping? When is it not? When is the mind aversive and pushing away? When is it not? And when is the mind lost in delusion? And when is it relatively free of delusion? And as we practice with something like mindfulness of breathing, that ability to remember these teachings and to remember our experiences as we've meditated over time and bring what we've come to understand from the mindfulness and clear comprehension of meditation experience and the teachings, then we're letting go of the hindrances, of everything that gets in the way of our meditation, and we're becoming more and more. Our mind is becoming more and more unified and seeing more and more clearly. So this is how establishing mindfulness with the four establishments and developing a practice like especially mindfulness of breathing in the early discourses work together, so that the practice of mindfulness of breathing ultimately is, the way the discourses put it, is it fulfills the four establishments of mindfulness. It brings them to completion. And that completion is awakening, ultimate. But it also just leans us in that direction otherwise. So that circles me back to a foundation, I think, in what you hear from me, where it comes from. And that's the foundation of conviction. It does seem to me like the Buddhist teachings, as they've been passed down to us through all the different early traditions, that the Buddha meant what he said. We can take his words that way. He meant what he said. And especially he meant that there is a path. There is a path that can free even this heart and mind from the causes of suffering. If I follow it, or to the degree that we follow it. So that conviction, very strong. I wanted to name it because I think you probably hear it, and it's something that's developed as the Buddhist teachings have proven themselves in the fires of existence to be true and to be helpful, to make a difference. So even in the most impossible of times, we have teachings available to us that give us the strength to meet these conditions in ways that help us be okay, even when things are really not okay, and in ways that help us to act out of compassion, to make the difference we can make for others as well. Thank you.